Good afternoon. Today is November 2nd, it's 6 days short of an election, and we are pleased in these hyper-partisan times to have with us today an expert on political communication and the problem of misinformation. As you can see from our opening screen, Dr. Porismita Borah is Associate Professor at the Murrow College of Communication at Washington State University, and also a member of the graduate faculty of prevention science in that program at WSU. Her PhD degree is conferred by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She primarily studies messaging things, digital environments in the context of both politics and health. She is the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Public Opinion Research and is a nationally recognized scholar in her own right. She has received funding for her research from multiple sources, including the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the Poynter Institute. Further information about her research is available on the internet at her website, http:// It's a privilege to have her here today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Borah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barnett. I hope the sound is fine. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here to talk to you all. And as Dr. Barnett said, I work at Washington State University at the Murrow College of Communication. And yeah, so a brief sort of overview of what I'm going to talk today. I'll talk a little bit about how misinformation spreads, and I'll give an example of it from Twitter, from one of my projects. Talk about how what the consequences of misinformation are. Talk a little bit about why people believe in misinformation, and then we'll talk about what we can do to combat misinformation. And so, starting with false information is 70% more likely to be spread than the truth, and so it gets more attention. It gets more attention from people, and social media makes it easy for misinformation to spread, to be shared. Although I mean, I do want to point out that it doesn't mean that it's only because of social media we have misinformation. It's been false information has been there forever since, you know, and it does sort of. It's true that social media makes it easy for it to spread. Plenty of social media has been there before, which is like political propaganda. But while propaganda is not a new concept and has been, as I said, consistently been there throughout history, we live in a reality where, you know, it's that hyperconnectivity that and is making it so easy for this misinformation to be shared, and for sort of for us in our offline world or in our real world, as well as in our digital worlds, you know, it becomes so that's one of the main reasons why it's garnering so much of interest, and you know, there's so much of research on it. I did want to quickly ask one question. So how many of you think you've been exposed to misinformation, or you've seen and you realize that there has been? Of course, everybody in the room, almost. So we see it all the time. Yeah. Yes, it is. Okay, maybe you're not. Oh, okay, closer. Okay, better. Okay, yeah. taking it away from my mouth. So okay. So that was a full house. Almost everybody said they've seen, which kind of makes sense. So I was going to start with this is one of the very new projects that I'm working on, and what we are doing. We recently got funded for this from the National Science Foundation to study misinformation in the context of election integrity and COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. And so in the project, what we have a team of, these are the two people who, I'm taking their name because they are the detection team. They're from Georgia Institute of Technology, and they detection as in they work on detecting misinformation on social media platforms. And so, and then we do that, we look at what's spreading online, and then we look at strategies to how to correct them or fact check them, or what, you know, and once we have those strategies in experimental research, then we actually use those strategies on the social media platforms to see if it actually works in real life or not. So that's kind of just a little bit about the project. But I wanted to show you, what I wanted to show you was is the example of, so, and we've done this for like over months, looking at how it spreads, but I'm going to show you just 4 slides of, this is, let's say day 1, and there are 7 misinformation tweeters, 5 misinformation retweeters, and then these 2,000 people who follow these tweeters and retweeters, right? So we see a network. So here you can see a visual of a network that shows the people who are spreading that misinformation, whatever that might be. And so on day 2, that sort of becomes, so misinformation tweeters have become 63, 28 retweeters, and then the people who are following also increases because it has been retweeted so many times. Sorry, I keep taking my mic down. So then you see how the network grows of misinformation. And then the 3rd day, you see more, and 4th. And so by now, it has reached almost 50,000 people with that one misinformation that was spreading in the beginning. So that's where it becomes really complicated, because it spreads so fast. It's so easy for people to spread. And so this is one of the things that we are studying, looking at how it spreads and how that network grows, right? So, so before I go any further, I did want to talk a little bit about what we are talking about here. What's misinformation and what's disinformation? These are 2 words you hear all the time. So misinformation is false information that is shared without knowing it is fake. It's actually it's without an intent to deceive. So I could be sharing it without knowing that Facebook post that was posted by my friend or my family member, I did not know it was false information, and I shared it. And so it's without an intent to deceive. Whereas disinformation is doing that purposefully. So when you purposefully spread false information for political reasons or profit or propaganda, whatever that might be, that's disinformation. So that's sort of the 2 differences if you hear those. And again, a little bit, so misinformation versus disinformation, whether there is intent or not. If there is intent, it is disinformation. If there is no intent, then it falls under misinformation. So again, like I said, false information that is spread regardless of intent to mislead, a concept that goes back to the 15. I mean, it's, you know, as I said, it's been there in history forever. People who spread it, they often believe that information to be true. They don't know that they are spreading misinformation. We can all become distributors or victims of misinformation. And when it is deliberately weaponized, then it can turn into disinformation. And so similarly with disinformation, this is deliberately misleading and biased, as I said. It is generated by, you know, groups which have a motive. They have a motive to do it, whether it's political or otherwise. Campaigns are fueled by this misinformation. It can easily turn into misinformation, though, if you share it without knowing that it is false. So these are the 2 sort of conceptually, if you see it, what's the difference and whatnot, that sort of helps to understand. So there are all kinds of misinformation. There's text, images, videos, deepfakes, whatever, and it's all around us. If we are, you know, if you're looking for information online, if you're looking for, you know, news on social media, it's very easy to fall for misinformation, because it's a lot of times it's made to look like a news site, for instance. A lot of times it's made to look like a real video or images which are manipulated. So it's not really a big deal to fall for misinformation, frankly, because it looks so much similar to an actual news story or a video. So why should we worry about all of this false information surrounding us? What are some of the, what's some of the research what research, what does research show about the consequences of misinformation? There's a lot of literature. There's a huge interest in studying this, right? Rightfully so, and many scholars have consistently confirmed that exposure to misinformation can lead to people's final voting decisions. It can impact their voting decisions. It can erode public trust in governmental institutions. It can intensify ideological polarization. It can decrease trust towards the government, distrust in media outlets, authoritative institutions. So there's a whole list of consequences that can happen because you are misinformed, because you don't have the right information. And beyond those that I just talked about, one of the other sort of even more worrisome is long-term impact. So there's a lot of research that shows that once you are misinformed about a certain sort of issue, it is really difficult to take it away from you, because you tend to believe it, you tend to see it, and if you're repeatedly seeing that misinformation, it's difficult. The multiple studies have shown that misinformation not only sort of lingers in our memory, but it's also continues to discourage positive perceptions, attitudes, and other behaviors. Let's see. Yeah, and so if you fall for misinformation once, you can fall for it again. It's people who hold misperceptions. They are more susceptible to falling for new misinformation or other types of misinformation. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, it was declared the infodemic because there was so much misinformation about it. Also, there has been a lot of studies about it, and what are the consequences of people believing in terms of COVID-19, decreases trust in experts, neglect of preventive health measures, exposure to certain vaccine-related misinformation was also associated with sort of vaccine-related behavior about vaccines. And so there's a whole lot of sort of consequences about what happens when we hold those misperceptions. So one of the questions that I get asked a lot during interviews or other students. So why do we believe in misinformation? A lot of times the simple answer is we don't know it is misinformation. As I said, a lot of people sort of share misinformation without knowing it is misinformation. And so it's really very complex because we don't know it is misinformation, or because we believe it is real. We believe we think it is the fact, and so that's where the problem starts. And of course, there are a lot of in misinformation effects model that talk about how once we see a misinformation, particularly repeatedly, we keep seeing some misinformation, whether it's about voting, whether it's about COVID-19, we keep seeing it, we keep talking about it to our peers, to our groups, to people who think like us. Then what happens is that even if we had our facts, but a lot of psychological models shows that sometimes the misinformation replaces the information that was there with us, and we tend to start believing the misinformation more, and we forget the facts that might have been even there before in our minds. So there are models like and I don't want to go too much into detail about psychological models, but activation-based models of memory. So any exposure to misleading information that can activate certain memories, sometimes resonating with specific information, and then forgetting certain factual details. So it becomes really the complexity of this is that it becomes part of our worldview. It becomes part of our thinking. So then it gets really complicated to sort of get rid of it, or unless we take care to actually we take the steps to sort of get to the facts and get to the information which is correct. I think I talked about that repeated exposure to misinformation. It makes it very, very difficult to debunk once you have been repeatedly bombarded with the misinformation again and again, and especially if it circulates in with the people that you are talking to, if it circulates in your social media platforms that you're part of, if it circulates in your family or your friends or your peer groups, then it becomes really difficult. And one of those, and beyond, of course, the psychological mechanisms and some of the models that research has shown, motivated reasoning is often thought of as one of the main reasons why we believe in misinformation. So what's motivated reasoning is it's often used to understand the influence of political ideology on people's opinion formation. So any formation, any opinion, it's not necessarily only misinformation. But so motivated reasoning so whenever we process information, whatever information it might be, and it's not just misinformation, there are sort of, in general, there are two goals. One is a directional goal and one is accuracy goals. So accuracy goals is what we want to do. Accuracy goals is we are processing the information and we are looking for information for accurate information, right? So we want our information to be accurate. Whereas directional goal is the problem when we are looking for information that feeds to what is already in our mind. So we already have a sense of what we think about voter conspiracy or election integrity. We already have a sense, we already have formed an information. Then we go looking for information that's going to resonate with what we already have in our minds. So it's a directional goal, right? So we are looking, we are directing, we are looking for information that's, so then motivated reasoning becomes really, so in terms of misperceptions formation or in terms of misinformation, then motivated reasoning becomes really complicated because you find things that you agree with, right? And it's true of, I mean, it's not that only, it's not, we do it all the time. We all do it because it's good for our psychological being, right? If we are seeing things which resonate with us, it's comfortable for us. We don't want to see things which does not resonate with us because it's always uncomfortable to see something which is, and it's called a psychological dissonance. And so in general, human beings are looking for things that agree with them, that agree. So then with misinformation, it becomes all the more complicated because then you look for information that agrees with you, and then it's easier for you to fall for misinformation. So yeah, I mean, it's really easy to fall for misinformation because you might be looking in places where you are even if it is social media, you are in that area where you feel comfortable. It might be in a group that you're comfortable with. However, whatever it might be. A little bit of my water. I forgot my water bottle, so I'm drinking from the mug. So anyway, so what can we do about this? What can we do about? We all know that there is misinformation. We all know that there are consequences of misinformation. I guess we've all seen some in some way or the other. It could be a local example, it could be a national example, it could be a global during the pandemic. But we all know that there are consequences of misinformation. We kind of know why we believe, perhaps. And so, what can we do about it? I think the answer is not necessarily very easy. I don't think it is it's not a simple answer. And again, this is one of the other questions I get asked all the time by students or during interviews. So what can we do? And is there any hope? So one of the questions also is, does fact-checking work? And many of you, I'm sure, are aware of what fact-checking is. And does it work? Well, it depends. I mean, a lot of times it might, but a lot of times it might not. Because again, going back to that motivated reasoning, that idea that people are more prone to believe things which are in agreement with them is what makes it difficult even for things like fact-checking, right? So, so among the many solutions that are posed for misinformation problem. Fact checking and correction, and I'll talk about correction a little bit later, are among the most prominent. And they, even though there are challenges with fact checking and social correction, but it's one of the most common. It's most commonly used and thought to be. And a lot of sort of research shows that it tends to, fact checking tends to reduce misperceptions overall. But of course, like I said, there are challenges there as well. All right. So a lot of times correction about a singular event is easier to correct than broader misinformation about a preferred political party. So, you know, challenges of reaching the right. So what happens is if you're talking about singular events or certain sort of issues, it might be easier than changing worldview, people's worldview, or, you know, things like that, because those are broader those are more complicated, broader issues. And challenges of reaching the appropriate audience, which means this is again going back to this us living in our own sort of groups and silos sometimes, and echo chambers that they're called as in social media platforms, that you tend to talk to people that are similar to you, and you tend to believe people that are similar to you, whether it is ideologically, whatever it might be, and so that tends to make it challenging for us to reach people who actually believe in the misinformation, because they are circling in that sort of echo chamber who all believes in that misinformation. So it's really becomes hard to reach. So I wanted to show this because this is very close to a lot of the research I do and I'm doing currently. Is people like this guy who's trying to sort of correct somebody who's on the internet, and because it's they want to correct it, and so it becomes it's very the reason I bring it up is because it talks to this research area which is called social correction. So social correction is not, it's a little different from fact checking. A lot of time, I mean, it's sort of similar, but fact checking is when we talk about journalists fact checking politicians, right? Which is sometimes right after the debate, a presidential debate or any other political debates, or right after the president makes remarks about something, there are fact checkers that check whether this is correct or not. It's a little different from that. Social correction is when we correct each other. So you are on your Facebook and your friend, best friend, maybe your favorite aunt, shares something about the elections, upcoming elections, or whatever it might be, and you know that it is not correct because of you've read, you're confident it is not correct, and then you correct that person, right? So that's social correction. You look at you see people sharing misinformation, and then you correct. And my own research and a lot of our team's research, the NSF grant that I was talking about, research from our grant, and a whole lot of literature shows that social correction works a lot of times. It obviously will have its challenges, but it works. So there are ways that we can make it that we can make it better, and that's why I have some of that. It does take courage. It does take courage to say, that you're not correct. This is not what you're sharing is not correct information or accurate information. So to be able to do that, you need to have the confidence that what you are saying is true. And a lot of the research shows that we have to be civil about how we talk about this misinformation, how we correct. We have to be civil. We can't look down upon the person and saying, hey, look down upon that person and say something. It's something which is more confrontational. That's not the way to do it. So the way would be to that. Well, I mean, in one of my experimental studies that we are doing, we are seeing that when people say, people go with one-on-one and say, you know what, it's really easy to fall for misinformation. And it's not such a big deal. I fell for misinformation last time. I believed this, but now I know this is not correct, and that's why I want to tell you. Look at this. Read this. Here's a link I'm going to share. Read this story, and you will see why I'm saying this is not correct. So those are some ways of sort of correcting that research has shown that works for people, and people don't take it too personally or anything like that. I mean, of course, it will depend on the person's personality, like I said, personality as well. So there are these all different variables that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about this. I also wanted to talk about beyond social correction, which seems to work. We can definitely be doing a lot for ourselves, like cross-checking sources. And looking at multiple sources, right, across party lines, not just going to the sources that we think are, that we follow or we think are giving us correct information, but looking at information from the other side sometimes helps as well. People who reflect or think about the information, that repeatedly research shows that those who read and also reflect on it are they are able to combat misinformation. They are less susceptible to misinformation. Media literacy is one of the bigger ones that have shown that it could help if we are media literate from a young age. It is, of course, there are a lot of media literacy interventions and a lot of media literacy work that goes into schools and colleges. We have classes in university setting on media literacy, talking about how important it is to be aware of how our media messages come to us, and so on and so forth. And of course, we cannot forget organizations like journalists, who also play a pretty big role in fact-checking and making sure that the right information goes, are given to the audience. And then the role of the big tech and the social media platforms and what they can do to counter this, and not let groups that are repeatedly sort of spreading misinformation or making it available for others to see, and so on and so forth, to make sure that those are sort of take some steps towards that. So I think overall, I think combating misinformation cannot be done with one strategy, or cannot be done by just the organizations or just the government, or I think everyone has to be aware, and everyone has to play that role to be able to fight, or at least make it a little better. I don't think misinformation is ever going to go away. It isn't possible, but at least make it less. So again, any single strategy I don't think is adequate to counter misinformation, but with a multi-pronged approach, perhaps there is some hope. And well, I wanted to just leave you with that, and then you can take questions or.
Questions, comments?
Sure.
So I'm wondering if any of your experiments include getting the correction from an unlikely source. So some of the psychology research points to, if you hear like conservative who maybe goes against like the party belief on something, correct the misinformation, you're more likely to believe that it's from maybe more likely source, like somebody who identify as one of them. I'm curious if any of your experiment manipulations have how you're thinking about who the role of the corrector is, and like who the participant and the manipulator.
Sure.
For the benefit of those who
I'll repeat.
watching later, just broadly paraphrase.
Sure, absolutely. So the question from the audience member is that it's about the source. If there is an interaction of the source and the audience, if I'm understanding that correctly, especially across party lines, is that or even otherwise? Yes. Okay. So yeah, I mean that's a great question, and there's a lot of literature on that, as you know, psychology as well as in communication. And I have done some work as well as a lot of our colleagues and team members have done this work. That the source definitely matters, where the correction comes from. A lot of times we have seen that organizations that you trust. So it depends, right? So again, if I am seeing something from CDC and if I trust CDC and they are correcting my information, then I might trust the correction as well. But if I don't trust CDC in the first place, then their correction might not work. So that's why I was saying that sometimes fact-checking and correction works, but then there are those challenges. I'm glad you brought that up, because source does matter, but then again, that the issue of trust is really, really important. But in general, I think in general, sources, there is definitely an interaction of the sources and how corrections work. In a most recent study, and it's not exactly a source, but we were looking at sort of in Twitter, if the correction comes from a bot, like, the bots, or it comes from an organization, or if it comes as a promoted, like an advertisement, it actually did not make any difference to the audience. So it seems like people really did not, it did not matter, corrections still worked. People who were corrected, and in comparison to the control group who did not get the corrections, held less misperception. So it seems like sometimes it actually doesn't matter where it's coming from, and corrections in the bigger scheme of things, corrections actually makes misperceptions lower. Hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, sure.
Is there any effort in our school system to teach students how to fact check? What sources to trust, how to know what an appropriate source is, or what a truthful source, a reliable source is, and then how to find that information?
Sure. So the question from the audience member is that is there any effort in our school systems to teach how to find reliable sources and what we should trust, and how do we and how, what was the last one? Sorry.
How to find reliable sources.
How to find.
And who to trust when you're, first of all, to look.
Yes.
To ask the question, and then to find reliable sources.
Sure.
To answer the question.
Yeah. So to look for reliable sources and yes, and then of course who to trust and to look for reliable sources. I mean, that question, actually, the answer to that question is always the part of my, lot of the studies we write, the implications of the studies is that we need to do this. So I don't know so much about the school system to speak if some schools are doing this or not. My guess would be that some are and some might not be, but every time we write these reports and we publish, and the implications is that we need to start this as early as possible. So it's not in college. College is too late. So we have to start doing it in schools, and we need to make students. That's why that media literacy part is so important, that kids need to know that there are that every information that you see is not correct. So they need to know that you need to find the correct source to trust, and asking those questions, as you said, and finding that. I think that's the first step, actually, for kids growing up now, and with social media and mobile phones, and which is in their hand, and which makes it easier to find misinformation as well as finding the correct information. So it's, it plays that two sides of the same sort of. It can be good as well as bad at the same time, because the technology. But yes, to answer your question, I don't know if all schools are doing that or not, but I would say that's always my recommendation, that has to be done if it has not been yet. Yes.
Is there any research into reliable sources? So when you look at people that are putting out information, has anyone studied that group of individuals and said, okay, we can say with certainty that this entity is most accurate, more so than this, a comparative of sources?
Yeah. So the question is there research to see if there is a sort of so I'm trying to think of if there are sources that are to be trusted. That's what you're saying, right? Sources that are accurate, sources that are, if there's a platform that, right, proven. Yeah, that's a. I mean, if I don't know if there is like a actual sort of research that has looked at what can be trusted or what might not be trusted. But in general, if you're thinking about news and information, in general, the wire services are to be trusted. I mean, in the sense that they do not. The wire services are just the plain information. They are not yet, they haven't been yet gone to the media organizations to be written as a story or to be, as people talk about giving their own angle or whatever, like CNN will do their own or MSNBC or Fox News. It hasn't gone there yet. So a lot of times people think that the wire services are just, the plain information. But that question is complicated to answer because what I think is trustworthy might not be trustworthy for someone else, right? So again, that political ideology might play a role, partisanship might play a role, our worldviews might play a role in what we trust and what we don't trust. So that becomes really, really complicated because of that. But in general, if every country probably has some of this list of sort of the most reliable sources or media organizations, which could be helpful to follow. And I would always say that instead of following one source, it's always good to go to multiple sources and look at multiple, information from multiple sources. Yep. Yes.
Those of us that have worked in research, if we observe and then we have evidence, and then we throw it out for peer review, that's how we get to know whether or not other people support our research. So that would be the way to find a good source. Put it out there, other than opinions, a lot of people have. But if there's evidence behind your opinion, then your peers can.
Right. More of a comment than a question. Yeah. So, talking about finding good sources, comparing it to the peer review process in research or in academia, the way we do research, we write and then it's peer reviewed by experts in the field, and somewhat could be done for finding sources for trustworthy sources. Yes.
So your research shows that if you counter some false information with a personal counter, one-on-one, that seems to be effective. What can be effective on a broader scale? I guess this ties in with the previous comment, but what strategies can be effective that reach a wider audience to convince them of the falseness of some information? Are there strategies?
Yes. So the question is how to reach broader audiences with the correct information. My answer would be that would be fact-checking by the journalists. Because news media will have the biggest audience, right, or reach, other than doing one-on-one. That would be fact-checking by journalists. And journalists, irrespective of where, which organization they are from, if they give out the accurate information and they call out people, politicians, whoever, organizations, if there is misinformation, calling those out, I think that would be one way of getting to a broader sort of audience than the social correction that we are talking about. But answers your?
Partly. I'm just wondering if there's any way to break through the silo effect. And can you, since we have this echo chamber phenomenon, is there any way to break through that with truthful information when within the echo chamber it's false?
Mm-hmm. So the question is breaking the echo chamber and putting the sort of the accurate information. Yeah, that's very difficult, right? Because that's on us to be not in that echo chamber. Because if you are surrounding yourself with the people that believe exactly the way you do, it's very, very difficult for someone from outside to come and correct you or give you the correct information. I mean, again, the only way for that would be to go to, as I was saying in the beginning, that cross-checking your information with multiple sources, because then when you are away from your echo, you will be a little away from your echo chamber because you're looking at multiple sources, not just the sources that you trust or your echo chamber trusts. I think that's where the biggest challenge is, because if you are staying in that silo and you're staying in that echo chamber, it just becomes it's difficult to first of all reach that audience. That's why that I had that point about reaching that audience, and it also people are not ready to believe when you are in the echo chamber. So that's where it becomes complicated.
The comment that may yield the question, in my field, which is law. There's a lot of concern about whether it's possible to seek impartial juries, either civil or criminal cases. And there's concern about what we call, I think it's similar to what you've discussed, but not quite the same, queuing effect. By which I mean, if you ask a prospective juror, what have you read or heard about this case? That prospective juror may, in all sincerity, say, well, I don't think I've read or heard anything. But then if that person is selected to the jury and hears evidence in the courtroom, it cues up the old recollection of what they had been previously exposed to. And because it's something that was always there, they give it more weight, thinking that it's something they've always known rather than something they're seeing and hearing for the first time. It distorts the administration of justice. Does this have any connection with the phenomena that you have been discussing, the public discourse?
Yes. So to repeat the question, if there is, you're talking about the sort of activation of memory, right? So in case of juries, which happens if even if you have not heard or read about the case, but when you hear in the courtroom, then it might bring up some memory about what you already had, some information. Is that similar to misinformation? That's the question? Yes. Okay. So I would say yes. I would say that's very, very similar, because you might think that you did not, that it's not misinformation, you did not have that, but when you see something and someone talks to you, then it resonates in your mind, and that misinformation becomes even more more active in your mind, and it also connects to other misinformation. That's the other thing. There are a lot of these conspiracy theories and misinformation. They're all very well connected. A lot of times, if you read about conspiracy theories, that's how the big conspiracy theorists they work that way. They make sense. They try to make sense of a whole sort of narrative or a narrative that they put forward, which are all connected in small ways. And so you hear about something, and then that's in your mind, and then you hear a new thing, and then you make those connections, and so your misinformation grows because you're making that connection in your mind about other misinformation which might be connected to that bigger. But yeah, to answer your question, I think that's very, very possible that it happens in misinformation. Yeah.
Ask another question that relates to how do you know about, how can you measure and identify reliability? And in the legal system, we say, where's the evidence? Not just what's the claim, but where is the evidence? In the 2020 election litigation, one of the contentions was there are so many claims and so much doubt about the reliability of outcomes in some states that the election should not be certified. There's too much disagreement about it, too much uncertainty. But when that got to court, the court asked, where is the evidence? And the house of cards fell flat in almost every case. Is that approach, where's the evidence? Not just what is the claim, but where is the evidence? Is that a pathway toward identifying reliable sources? Sources that provide the evidence. And that be part of training for kids in school, for example.
So the question is finding to find reliable sources. Can we ask the question, where is the evidence? Similar to the example that was given was about the election integrity in the 2020 elections. And so I think so. I think you could ask about that. I think we can ask ourselves when we look at information online and we look at a source and we read about something. I think we can ask whether there is evidence to the claim that is being made, whatever claim that might be. If it was taking the same example as 2020 election, that it was fraud, I think the best way to decide whether it was or not is to find evidence whether it was fraud or not, right? So just like the court that did. I think even with media and reliable sources, I think we can do the same thing. We could look for evidence from whether a story is giving us evidence or is the story just is an opinion piece and not backing up their claims. So that would be an important way to see whether that story has facts or is it just opinion. I think that might be one way, at least. Yes.
So we often think about the least politically engaged being the most susceptible to misinformation, but if you've probably seen as well sort of the parabola of the most politically engaged are also the best at motivated reasoning, like they're really good at those directional goals and finding that information. I was curious if that was measured in your experiments as well, or how you were sort of combining the accuracy of the directional goals and if political engagement was a variable. You're seeing those connections.
Sure. The question is if political engagement is political engagement and political ideology as well, right? And interest is a variable in misperceptions and misinformation studies. In my own research, I definitely looked at political ideology as well as political interest. I mean, both of those play a lot of a big role and a big role. And just as you said, the more, I mean, it most of the time, the more politically interested you are, more politically engaged you are, you also are already determined about where you stand on issues a lot of times. If you're undecided, a lot of times you might not be that, well, it's hard to say though, right? I mean, sometimes you could be politically interested as well. But I haven't looked at political engagement and misperceptions. I've definitely looked at ideology, and that plays a role every time. And political ideology is one of the, a lot of times you control for ideology and then everything else falls flat because it is takes up all the power and it makes everything else go away because political ideology plays such a big role in misperceptions and because if it's the other guy who's spreading misinformation well, if it is my guy who's spreading information that others are saying is misinformation, I tend to think it is not misinformation. That's the correct information because I trust that guy, right? But then if it is the other side, it's always, oh, that's false. That's not true. So that sort of is the difficulty. That is the big difficulty, and that's where I think politicians can take advantage and are known to take advantage, not just now, it has been in all throughout history. So, yeah.
If there are questions or comments, Dr. Borah, thank you very much for joining.
Thank you so much.